Chapter 154. Jingwan's first reaction was, did she encounter an arrogant retard again? Could it be that this was the common logic of these people? Alright, in this place with a clear hierarchy, the other party belonged to the top of the food chain. It was natural for them to be aloof and think that their face was boundless. As long as there was even the slightest bit of dissatisfaction with their wishes, that would be sweeping away their face. These people, they could be ragged on the inside, but this face was sometimes more important than their lives. If they lost even the slightest bit, they could take out a stance that would not rest until they were dead. However, she seemed to have one foot in your class. Her grandfather and grandmother had said that she could live a bit more willfully, a bit more selfishly. Then now, she could refuse, so why would she use this kind of method to humiliate herself to give other people face? Although right now she was just a fox borrowing the tiger's might, completely relying on her fiancé's name. The so-called luck was a kind of strength, being able to borrow power naturally also counted as a kind of strength. Moreover, even if she didn't have this fiancé, according to her grandfather's power and status, the Gongqin Wangfei couldn't do anything to her, right? Jingwan fiddled with the prayer beads on her wrist. She gave her a way out, but she couldn't be blamed if she lost face. Looking at the Gongqin Wangfei, she faintly smiled. If Wangfei Nyang insists on thinking like this subject girl has no opinion. Don't mention the Gongqin Wangfei, the vast majority of the people present didn't dare to believe it. Was this courage borrowed from the heavens? Impudent. The Gongqin Wangfei stood up and directly smashed the cup. The Gongqin Wangfei was thunderous with rage, the servants kept quiet out of fear. On the other hand, those people who were Li Hongyuan's sister-in-law or sister-in-law looked like they were watching a play on the wall. Jingwan remained unmoved, slightly tilting her head as if she was thinking about something. After a moment, she stood up. If Wangfei Nyang doesn't welcome this subject girl, then just directly send out the guest order. There's no need to make it so ugly. Who is a fool? This subject girl will take her leave. Jingwan crouched down, unhurriedly turning around. Her gait was leisurely, truly preparing to leave. Gongqin Wangfei was so angry that her face turned ashen. Ever since she was born, no one dared to not give her face like this. What kind of place do you think this is? You don't want to come and go as you please. Then, Jingwan was stopped in her tracks. Jingwan stopped and turned to look at Gongqin Wangfei. Then, what does Wangfei Nyang want? Gongqin Wangfei sneered. Mama, tell our Luo third miss. What is the crime of disrespecting the imperial family? I think the princess consort has misunderstood. This minister's daughter is not disrespecting the royal family, but rather disrespecting a person who wants to humiliate this minister's daughter for no reason. Anyway, my grandfather is the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, and my foster mother is Great Elder Princess. It doesn't matter if I'm humiliated, but it's not good to implicate them. Your Highness, don't you think so? She was the dignified Qin Wangfei, yet she had humiliated others first. If she really wanted to pin a big hat on her, then she would have to come up with an explanation. If you admit your mistake first, then she will also admit that she disrespected the imperial family. When the time comes, even if she is punished, your Gongqin Wangfei's arrogant and despotic reputation will spread out. Jingwan was unmoved. From the beginning to the end, she was calm and even had a faint smile. In this world, naturally, there was no need to pursue equality. That thing had never been heard of. Even if it was an iron law, in the privileged class, it could be regarded as a child's play. Jingwan was not born at the bottom, so relatively speaking, she still had some right to speak. Therefore, Jingwan still tried her best to protect herself and the people around her. Luo third miss is really sharp-tongued. Because this minister's daughter likes to tell the truth most of the time. She doesn't know how to beat around the bush, which is really not very likable. The reputation of being sharp-tongued was not a good thing for a girl, but Jingwan refuted it so easily, saying that she was not good. It didn't matter, everyone was not good together. While the Gongqin Wangfei was angered by Jingwan to the point of her liver hurting, on the male guest side, Li Hongyuan was the first to hear the news. Originally, he was drinking alone, but because Jingwan was there, he didn't leave. Someone dared to bully his wife, but after all, that was a woman, and also his sister-in-law. Directly making a move on her, even if it was reasonable, it would become unreasonable. Li Hongyuan directly had someone bring a large jug of wine, slapped open the seal, picked it up, and walked directly to the Gongqin Wangfei. The courtiers who were talking to the Gongqin Wangfei, seeing this living king of hell, hurriedly made excuses to leave, for fear of being implicated. The Gongqin Wangfei was stunned, then immediately realized something, subconsciously turning around. Sixth brother, what's the matter? It must be said, Li Hongyuan's brothers, the most sullen thing was that they had to be polite from time to time, but there was one who didn't care, even if they exploded in anger. After turning around, you could only act as if nothing had happened, and act like a good brother. Li Hongyuan slightly pushed upwards, tossing the jug up a bit, his hand moving down from the side, his palm supporting the bottom of the jug, to fourth brother, it's just a jug of wine, please. Motherfucker, do you have to toast me one by one? Even a cow couldn't stand it a few times, right? One could tell just by smelling the wine. Not to mention a jug, even if it was half a jug, it would still cause one to collapse immediately. Lousy didn't provoke you right now, what the fuck are you playing at? Sixth brother, are you joking with fourth brother? It looks like fourth brother isn't willing to accept. Fourth brother, are you not giving this prince face? Li Hongyuan slightly narrowed his eyes, a ruthless aura condensing in his eyes, as if a man-eating beast was about to break out of its cage. The Gongqin Wangfei was startled by Li Hongyuan's gaze, unconsciously taking a step back. And it was this reaction that made the Gongqin Wangfei even angrier, the hands behind his back clenched tightly, the veins on the back of his hands bulging, trying to suppress his anger, his voice almost squeezed out from between his teeth. Li Hongyuan, don't go too far. So, you really don't want to give me face? Why should this prince drink? How much face do you have? The Gongqin Wangfei lowered his voice, but in this silent scene, there were too many people who heard his words. You really don't want to drink? The ruthlessness in Li Hongyuan's eyes seemed to fade a bit, as if saying that if you don't drink, then forget it. If I don't drink, what can you do? The Gongqin Wangfei was clearly prepared to be unyielding to the end. It looks like this prince really can't do anything to you. In any case, your imperial father's son, this prince can't kill you. Li Hongyuan said, taking back his hand. The wine jar in his hand fell straight down, with a bang, wine and porcelain shards flew out. The Gongqin hurriedly retreated, naturally he was caught in the crossfire. Li Hongyuan stood in place, not moving, even if the porcelain shards splashed on his calf, he was indifferent. They all say persimmons are easy to pinch, I can't touch you, but this prince actually has a lot of people I can touch. His gaze swept over the audience, and the people who heard him wanted to immediately dig a hole and bury themselves, but in fact, they didn't dare to move, afraid that if they moved, they would fall into the eyes of this living king of hell. Where's Qin Tianming? What's a small fry? If you want to make a move, you need to find a big one, that way it'll be interesting. Li Hongyuan, you dare. The Gongqin Wangfei almost jumped up in anger. He thought that he was unyielding, making Li Hongyuan, who never admitted defeat, admit defeat. This was something that even imperial father couldn't do, and he was a bit proud of himself. But the result, this bastard wanted to make a move on someone, it was even more unbearable than making a move on him. After all, Li Hongyuan still had some scruples, but his father-in-law, although he was a military general, Li Hongyuan's martial arts were definitely above the other side. If he really made a move on his father-in-law, it would highlight his incompetence, and it would make the people who supported him feel disappointed and bitterly disappointed. The damage was simply not on the same level. Master, the left governor hasn't arrived yet, he should still be in the Yamen. That's right, it's only the imperial concubine's birthday, most of the people who came were women, it's already not bad for the courtiers to come and eat before the banquet, and that's to give the Gongqin Wangfei face, most of them won't show up. Since Laozi isn't here, my son is fine. Li Hongyuan stretched out his hand, as if he was stretching his fingers. Not long after his voice fell, 3 of Qin Tianming's sons were dragged out by his guards, and like dead dogs, they were thrown in front of Li Hongyuan. This Laozi was clearly a tiger, but these 3 were trembling in fear, without the slightest bit of backbone. Li Hongyuan didn't hold back and directly lifted his foot to kick. The Gongqin Wangfei wanted to stop him, But Li Hongyuan's foot just turned, easily avoiding him, and then he landed on whoever he wanted. In the blink of an eye, there was a series of wails, and the three were kicked out. And all of them were vomiting blood, 100% their internal organs were injured. The Gongqin Wangfei's guts were about to burst. These were all his brothers-in-law, although they weren't his father-in-law's most valued eldest son, but 3 of his sons were in his house. Because he was injured, his father-in-law would put all the blame on him. In the end, the only one who couldn't bear the consequences would be him. After all, that was his biggest reliance, and it had nothing to do with Li Hongyuan. Qin Tianming didn't dare and couldn't touch Li Hongyuan. The Gongqin Wangfei's eyes were red, and he directly wanted to pounce on Li Hongyuan. Li Hongyuan stepped aside. Are you sure you want to fight with this prince? You fought with this prince first. If you're injured, you can't blame this prince. Stretching his wrist, there was obvious malice in his eyes. The Gongqin Wangfei's reason came back a little, and more importantly, he saw Prince Kang in his line of sight. Thinking that this big brother of his was almost directly crippled by him, his heart was filled with fear, and he naturally showed a cowering posture. If his vassals saw this, he didn't know whether to be disappointed that he was a spineless coward, or gratified that he could bend and stand tall. Why? Li Hongyuan, this prince only wants to ask you, why are you acting crazy for no reason? Chapter 155. Looking at Li Hongyuan's departing back, he even looked somewhat leisurely, while the Gong prince stood in place, desperately restraining his anger. His eyes were red, as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. He looked exactly like an enraged beast. The enemy was clearly in front of him, but there was an invisible cage firmly binding him, unable to take a step forward. Until Li Hongyuan's figure disappeared, the Gong prince was unable to return to his senses for a long time. At this moment, even Prince Kang and Prince Rui looked at their fourth brother and felt that he was a little pitiful. However, they had also suffered losses in the hands of that king of hell, so they couldn't sympathize with him. As for what happened to the female guests, they had to ask clearly. They didn't want their own family to make the same mistake. At that time, the one who would be unlucky would be themselves. The women of the inner compound cut his face. As a man, he couldn't bicker with them. After all, no matter how much of a scoundrel he was, he still needed this kind of bearing, so only men like them could bear it. He was so righteous and confident, if it was someone else, they would be the same. But far from his level, they wouldn't be able to vent their anger like him standing in Li Hongyuan's position. Wasn't it very satisfying? And what happened here naturally reached the Gongqin princess consort's ears at the first moment. Her own prince was ruthlessly humiliated, 3 brothers were kicked until they vomited blood, her vision darkened, and she almost fainted. And when she heard the reason, she wasn't stupid, she could still connect the dots. She looked at Jingwan again, as if she was dipped in poison, but her lips trembled, unable to spit out half a word. Among the sisters-in-law, she lived the most unscrupulously, and the least needed to play tricks. In this aspect, she was naturally weaker, but that didn't mean she was like Luo Jingying, without any self-awareness. If she blurted out something bad, perhaps that king of hell would put the debt on her husband and her family. The consequences were absolutely not something she could bear. The so-called disaster from the mouth was probably like this. Jingwan was baffled by the Gongqin princess consort's gaze. What kind of life and death enmity was there? Mu Gonggong walked over to Jingwan, "Third miss." Unconsciously, there was a bit of flattery. Jingwan slightly retreated a step. The people around Jin Qinwang seemed to be a bit scary. Greetings to eunuch. What instructions does eunuch have? Yen, it was better not to offend her future husband's steward. Seeing Jingwan salute him, eunuch Mu hurriedly avoided her. Even if he had 9 lives and 9 guts, he didn't dare to accept it. But at the same time, she also realized that she had gone overboard. It was true that third Miss Luo was Master's most cherished person, but she herself did not know R. If her actions were too obvious, not only would she fail to please Master, but she would also be frightened. When she returned, she could probably prepare to die. Thus, she hurriedly straightened her face. "Third young lady, this servant doesn't deserve this. Master asked this servant to inform Miss that Miss can return with your family." Since she was not happy to stay here, she naturally did not need to stay any longer. So to say, Gongqin Wangfei's change in expression should be related to Jin Wang. Since he had already asked her to go back, she was more than happy to do so. Anyway, if she hadn't been stopped, she would have already left. So she nodded, and then, she saluted everyone high and mighty. There was no need to call her family. Just now, when Jingwan was preparing to leave, they had already stood up. Jingwan looked at old Madame Luo and nodded her head without leaving a trace. Then, under the watchful eyes of everyone, the Luo family, led by old Madame Luo, slowly walked away. And the servants of the Gong Wangfu, without master's permission, naturally didn't dare to stop them. The old madam of each family, the mistresses of the family, and even the noble women, all looked at each other in dismay. If it was said that Jingwan left, then it could be said that she was young and impetuous, and couldn't bear being wronged, so she had a small temper. However, old Madame Luo didn't even say a word. Her granddaughter said to leave, and she just led the way. Wasn't the right thing to do to teach her own child, mediate, and everyone would have a way out. Then, everyone would still be amiable. Even if Luo Peishan was an important official in the court, it was very unwise for the Luo family to offend a Wangye who held real power. Old Madame Luo wasn't such a short-sighted person. There were rumors that she loved the Luo third young lady very much. Looking at her attitude, it really wasn't fake at all. She couldn't tolerate the slightest grievance, to the point where she had no principles and didn't care about the Luo family. Everyone was smart. Seeing the attitude of the Gong Wangfei, and the appearance of the Qin Wangfu's personal attendant, they immediately sent people to inquire about it. Then, they quickly got the news. After all, with such a big commotion, it was impossible to hide it even if they wanted to. With the King of Hell taking action, everyone shut their mouths. This lord, no one could afford to offend. Master Liao Chen said that Jin Wangfu and the Luo third young lady are a match made in heaven. The imperial concubine Nyang Nyang in the palace has already said that Jin Wangfu didn't bring bad luck to his wife, it's just that the marriage hasn't come yet. His Majesty also attaches great importance to it. Jin Wangfu's protection of the Luo third young lady, whether it's because there won't be another one if he misses this one, or because he really lost face, in short, the Luo third young lady who is connected to Jin Wangfu's fate cannot be provoked. A noblewoman said lightly. When the people around heard this, they nodded in deep agreement. The third miss of the Luo family looked gentle and kind, but if someone really provoked her, she would be a tough nut to crack. With her protective grandparents, great elder princess's support, and the King of Hell, whoever provoked her would be unlucky. It was fine if it was her own fault, but if her family was implicated, she would be a great sinner. Didn't they see the wife of the left governor crying to see her son just now? He was kicked to the point of vomiting blood. If something went wrong, it might leave a lifelong illness. When Jin Wangfu left, he seemed to have said that the left governor should go to him and ask for forgiveness. TSK, who knew what would happen. Looking at the Gongqin Wangfei again, her birthday was like this. However, there were still a few people who pitied her, and more people were rejoicing in her misfortune. The main reason was that she was usually too flamboyant. Other people's husbands took in concubines, but she showed off how much her own Wangye's husband cared about her. Other people's concubines stirred up trouble, but she lamented that the Gongqin Wangfu was too quiet. When everyone was the same, their hearts would be balanced. When other people's feet hurt, you still ruthlessly stepped on them. How could you not be hated? Therefore, today, you were ruthlessly taught a lesson and lost a lot of face. You deserved it. That was why it was said that people should be low-key. Even if they were living a good life, they should just be happy. Not everyone could be like Jin Wangfu, who casually drew hatred and didn't worry about being retaliated against. However, it might not be the right time to retaliate against Jin Wangfu. Therefore, thinking about it this way, perhaps Jin Wangfu was just enjoying himself in time. On the way out, because there was no master's order, the servants also didn't prepare a soft sedan. The group of people left on foot. Jingwan and the others also heard Li Hongyuan's actions. Even Sun Yijia, who had an extremely bad impression of Li Hongyuan, was silent. No matter what his purpose was, it was very satisfying. From now on, whoever dared to find trouble with Wn Mai would have to think twice. On the contrary, Jingwan appeared to be very silent. Jin Wangfu's actions had repeatedly exceeded her expectations. Instead, it was old Madame Luo who patted Jingwan's hand. "Silly girl, don't think so much. The so-called one's glory is bound together, one's loss is also bound together. You and Jin Wangfu are engaged. Gongqin Wangfei humiliating you is no different from humiliating him." This was Jin Wangfu's own words, and it was basically what everyone agreed on. At this time, when old Madame Luo emphasized it again, Jingwan instead felt that there was a deeper meaning. Don't think too much, but this person, had a bit of a rebellious heart, and would subconsciously think too much. If Jin Wangfu wasn't because of this reason, then it could only be because of her. Alright, she really shouldn't think too much. Thus, Jingwan didn't hesitate to throw this question to the side. Old Madame Luo was actually very satisfied with Li Hongyuan's actions. When she found out that Jin Wangfu really didn't have a terrible reputation and no power on the surface, she immediately nodded and agreed. The most important thing was that he could protect Wan. In fact, he did this impeccably. If it was other people, such as Chen Zhengmin and Sun Yilin, when they encountered today's matter, they could only remain silent. No matter how angry they were, they could only watch as Wan was bullied. At most, they would swear in their hearts that they would do this and that in the future. But most people would only look at the present. Even if they retaliated in the future, the current grievances were real. She even hoped that Wan wouldn't be wronged in the slightest. When they left the Gong Wangfu, everyone boarded the carriage. Then, not long after, they were intercepted halfway. Daring to do this kind of thing so openly, other than a certain person, no one else could think of it. Fortunately, the only people who came with old Madame Luo were Jingwan and Sun Yijia. As for the others, even Wangsha didn't come. When Li Hongyuan found Luo Peishan and said those words, Luo Peishan basically repeated them word for word to his old wife. To let Wan be alone with him, to want her granddaughter to be pure and innocent and not be taken advantage of, that was absolutely impossible. But, could you stop him? If you really were stopped, you probably wouldn't be a living king of hell. So, this grandson-in-law, if you were satisfied with something, you would be very satisfied. If you were dissatisfied with something, you would want to chop him up. Old Madame Luo finally sighed and could only nod in agreement. She only hoped that Jin Wangfu wouldn't be too excessive. Li Hongyuan only had Gong Mema stay behind to serve, and everyone else was sent away. Sun Yijia watched as Jingwan boarded Jin Wangfu's carriage. It didn't have the symbol of the Wangfu, and it wasn't eye-catching. Thinking of his bad reputation, she was worried that Jingwan would suffer. Even if the two were engaged, as long as they weren't married, they would still be a single man and woman together. If people knew, it would also be bad. If he cared even a little bit, he shouldn't have done this kind of thing. Sure enough, it's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. She endured and endured, but in the end, Sun Yijia also jumped off the carriage. Yijia, come to grandmother's carriage. Before she could take 2 steps, Sun Yijia was stopped by old Madame Luo. Looking at old Madame Luo, who was lifting the curtain, and then at Jin Wangfu's carriage, she hesitated, but still gave up and didn't chase. Old Madame loved Wan Mai dearly, and was so calm and collected, there shouldn't be any problems, right? She turned and boarded old Madame Luo's carriage. Grandmother, old Madame Luo pulled her to sit beside her, and the carriage slowly moved forward. A moment later, old Madame Luo opened her mouth. Jin Wangfu treats Wan differently, you don't have to worry. Sun Yijia stared blankly, she didn't understand what this meant, but seeing that old Madame Luo didn't have any intention to talk more, she could only suppress her doubts. I understand, grandmother. You're also a good child. In terms of status, marrying Jingbo is a grievance for you. It's nothing, grandmother. I don't feel wronged, really, I don't feel wronged at all. Sun Yijia paused. To tell you the truth, in the Luo family, I feel much happier than in Dingguo Fu. Being able to marry Jingbo is my life's greatest fortune, a fortune cultivated from 8 lifetimes. It's also Jingbo's fortune to be able to marry you. Don't think too much about your maternal family's matters, just live a good life with Jinghua. As for grandmother, I don't ask WN to have great glory, splendor, wealth, and rank, I only wish for her to be well. I also have the same expectations for you too. It's just that the heavens seem to want to shower her with riches and honor, but it's hard to predict whether it will be smooth sailing. She hopes that you too will be well, so you must be well. Sun Yijia's eyes reddened. How could she not know what old Madame Luo meant? One person for a lifetime, she also knew and even supported it, grandmother. All right, stop crying, let's not talk about this. If you don't mind that grandmother is an old woman, you can chat with grandmother. You can talk about anything. Perhaps it was because of Jingwan, but she was more patient with people who were close to Jingwan. And on the other side, Jingwan sat at the side of the carriage with her head slightly lowered, while Li Hongyuan half leaned on the middle seat. Ever since Jingwan got on the carriage, his line of sight never left her. If Jingwan knew that he had previously smashed the wine jug and splashed his clothes and shoes, she would know at this moment that he had completely changed into a new set of clothes. This carriage didn't look conspicuous from the outside, but it was actually very big. The decorations inside were also very luxurious. Compared to the carriage that Jingwan had stayed in for a short period of time, this carriage was even better. Every little detail revealed that Jin Qinwang was rich and super rich, but it wasn't the least bit uncouth. It was extremely tasteful and matched his status. Moreover, Jin Qinwang was clearly a hedonist. Luxury, tastefulness, and comfort. When these three things were put together, it was even more difficult to satisfy. But for this person, it seemed like it was just a piece of cake. Come here. Li Hongyuan's slightly low voice sounded. It was relatively soft, almost enough for Jingwan to hear without scaring her because of the sudden sound. Jingwan raised her head. Li Hongyuan pointed at the seat in front of her, the meaning was self-evident. Jingwan hesitated for a moment, but still got up and sat over there. First, she couldn't refuse. Even if she was tough, she still had to choose a partner. Obviously, it was useless for Li Hongyuan. Also, Jingwan wasn't a native of the ancient times. The concept of keeping a distance between men and women wasn't that heavy. The other party was her own fiancé, and there was no one around, so it didn't matter if he got closer. Although, subconsciously, she rejected romantic stallion men, but she didn't have any expectations for the other party, let alone hope for love. Sooner or later, she would reach this step, so she wouldn't be very resistant. Li Hongyuan very naturally put his hand on Jingwan's waist. With a little force, he pulled her in to prevent her from losing her balance. At the same time, he also brought her closer to his body. Jingwan subconsciously reached out to block his chest. However, even if she was much stronger than the average girl, she was still far from Li Hongyuan. His other hand held Jingwan's white and slender fingers, and gently rubbed them. Jingwan only held hands with her boyfriend in her previous life, but compared to this, the difference was like heaven and earth. Moreover, this handsome man was looking at her tenderly and affectionately, as if she was his whole world. The touch of his fingertips caused an electric current to surge through her body, making her feel numb, and her body couldn't help but tremble. Your Highness, Chem? Li Hongyuan responded softly. His voice was low and seductive. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her fingertips. Once, twice, 3 times, he took turns kissing her, not letting go of any of her fingers. Jingwan only felt that Li Hongyuan's lips were slightly cold. Like she said, he was the kind of handsome man who had no flaws. The shape of his lips was naturally exceptionally beautiful. Even Jingwan had the urge to go up and have a taste. Although it wasn't that she hadn't kissed him before, but at that time, she was forced to kiss him while she was unconscious. She was scared to death, so who would have the mood to experience what it was like? Thinking of this, Jingwan unconsciously swallowed her saliva. When Jingwan realized what she had done, her face flushed red. She lowered her head and wished that she could be an ostrich for once. Jingwan would never admit that she was a pervert. It was all this bastard's fault. Jingwan's series of reactions naturally fell into Li Hongyuan's eyes. He curled his lips and laughed softly. Li Hongyuan let go of her hand and pinched her chin. He used a bit of force to force her to raise her head. Then, his hand moved along her neck and clasped the back of her neck. At the same time, he used his hand on her waist to press their bodies together. Li Hongyuan lowered his head slightly. Their lips were extremely close to each other. "Let you have a taste," Li Hongyuan coaxed. His breath caressed her face. In this aspect, a certain king of hell was definitely at the elite level. Jingwan was probably even worse than a rookie. The difference between their levels was too great. She couldn't control herself and was about to die. A demon had appeared. Who would be kind enough to take him away? Seeing that they were getting closer and closer and were about to touch each other, Jingwan's head suddenly tilted back and her body began to struggle. However, her struggle was futile, and Li Hongyuan's eyes were getting darker and darker. Wan, don't move. I'm going to get angry. It was more threatening than threatening. Jingwan was a little frightened by his eyes. He was temperamental. That's right. Li Hongyuan didn't insist on kissing her and leaned back. However, his hands weren't content. The touch on her waist and neck was gentle but couldn't be ignored. Jingwan felt goosebumps all over her body. Her waist and legs were weak. Jingwan really couldn't take it anymore. "Your Highness, Chem?" It was still that bewitching tone. "Can you let go of this subject's body?" Jingwan said with a slightly trembling voice. Okay. Jingwan wasn't happy. Not only because his hands didn't stop moving, but also because the more agreeable he was, the more likely it was a turning point. But, as expected, Li Hongyuan's tongue swept across her lips. "Kiss me and I'll let you go." Jingwan was originally trembling because of his seductive actions. However, after hearing his words, her face couldn't help but darken. "You're a dignified prince. Do you have to be so shameless? Bad girl, you clearly wanted to kiss me just now. Now it seems like you're forcing yourself. I've already told you that I won't force people." Jingwan wanted to swear. Isn't this forcing others? Seeing Jingwan's glare and sullen appearance, Li Hongyuan was in a good mood. "You really don't want to kiss me? But I want to kiss Wan. I was thinking that if you took the initiative, I would just kiss you. If it was me." Jing Wan suddenly leaned forward and pecked him on the lips before moving away. "Your Highness, please let go." Jingwan's movements were too fast and too sudden. Li Hongyuan didn't have time to do anything even if he wanted to. He couldn't help but laugh. "What a silly girl. Have you tasted it yet? This kind of thing should be experienced properly." Then, he told her how to experience it with his own hands. At first, it was just a kiss on the lips. Not long after, a certain someone was no longer satisfied with such contact. With a domineering force that couldn't be refused, he opened her teeth. It wasn't that he didn't kiss her deeply. It was just that when she was awake, that kind of refusal seemed even more wonderful. His lips swept across her pearly white teeth, swept across her palate, and entangled with her tongue to dance with him. He didn't know when, but Jingwan's action of pushing him out completely turned into an act of obedience. Not only her hands, but also her tongue. When a certain hand crept up to her chest, Jingwan's muddled consciousness seemed to finally realize that something was wrong. She suddenly woke up and retreated. She pressed Li Hongyuan's hand down and glared at him angrily. Li Hongyuan licked his lips as if he hadn't had enough. He looked at Jingwan and curled the corners of his mouth. There was an inexplicable sense of wickedness and mockery in his voice. "Wan, do you think that I don't have enough strength? So you want to press harder?" Jingwan was a little confused at first. Only when the hand squeezed her chest did she react. "Bastard." At the same time, she slapped his hand hard. From the sound of her voice, it was clear that she didn't show any mercy. This time, it was Li Hongyuan's turn to be startled. In his previous life, he seemed to have only been beaten by his father. This kind of method, this kind of person, was really fresh. Li Hongyuan looked at the back of his hand that was a little red. "Should this prince be glad that Wan didn't slap my face, Chem?" Jingwan pursed her lips. She was also angry out of humiliation, so she subconsciously slapped him. One must know that there were only a few people who dared to hit this prince. And the ones who really did it were probably Emperor Le Cheng and noble consort Su. If an ordinary person dared to hit him, it would definitely be a serious crime. However, he had already hit her. Li Hongyuan pinched her chin. After hitting this prince, shouldn't you immediately ask for forgiveness? TSK, if it's you, you're the one who's wronged first. This subject's daughter is rude. Your Highness, please forgive her. Li Hongyuan was a little surprised. I thought that you would resist to the death and not admit defeat. Last time in the palace, when I wanted to flog you, you didn't even frown. How can it be the same? It's not my fault. So, WN now feels that she was wrong. It's not enough to admit that she was wrong. She still has to change. This person had already been slapped. How could she change? Moreover, she didn't think that this matter was her fault. But forget it. She couldn't get through to these people who were under the imperial power. There was no need to resist to the death. She looked at Li Hongyuan with vigilance. What does your Highness want? Li Hongyuan first tapped his lips. WAN, you can either compensate me or let me hit you back. Jingwan looked at him, then closed her eyes. Your Highness, you can hit me back. Seeing that Jingwan seemed to be facing death with equanimity, Li Hongyuan's hand on her waist slid down to her buttocks, then he leaned close to her ear. If you want to hit me, you should hit me here. Moreover, you should take off my pants and hit me. Jingwan immediately opened her eyes and grabbed his collar. How could he be so shameless? Even if he had a bad record, she didn't have a bad impression of him from the few times she had met him. She thought that he was actually very cultured and didn't lack gentlemanly manners. Why was there such a big difference? You were just a subject before. Now you're my fiancé. Of course it's different. It turned out that Jingwan had voiced out her thoughts in a fit of rage. Your Highness also knows that I'm your fiancé. How many people haven't seen each other before getting married? As for herself, she had already been taken advantage of. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows. WN wants to consummate her marriage with her husband the first time she meets him? I thought that you would prefer this. There's a process of getting familiar with each other. When the time comes, it'll be natural. Of course, it was better to get familiar with each other first. However, that was to improve their understanding of each other's temperament, not their bodies. Li Hongyuan pinched her face. You're the one who needs to apologize to this prince. It's your choice to choose one out of the two. All right, I'll give you a chance to choose again. There's no third choice. Li Hongyuan shook his head. She had already taken off her pants and buttocks. The level of embarrassment was off the charts. In any case, they had already kissed, so one more kiss wouldn't matter, right? This time, she closed her eyes and blushed. WAN is such a smart girl. How could you make mistakes again and again today? You're the one who should apologize to this prince. He had already kissed her, yet he still wanted her to take the initiative. How shameless. Fine. Jingwan grabbed his clothes again. She pulled hard and bit down. It was a real bite. Li Hongyuan didn't just feel the sting on his lips, he also tasted blood. This small injury was naturally harmless. On the contrary, Li Hongyuan felt that it was quite exciting and enjoyable. This little wolf cub like WN reminded him of her ruthlessness when she killed people in his previous life. It made him want to strip her clean right now and eat her whole. However, Li Hongyuan restrained himself and didn't move. Other than cooperating with her a little, he completely let her do as she pleased. Jingwan felt that he wanted her to take the initiative to apologize to him. His lips moved away slightly. Continue. This apology has to be sincere. At the very least, it has to satisfy this prince. For this kind of thing, whether he was satisfied or not was up to him. Who knew if he was satisfied or not? Jingwan wanted to bite this shameless person to death. WAN still wants to bite this prince. Come at me, this prince doesn't mind. Jingwan directly let go and pretended to be dead. She didn't want to pay attention to him anymore. Moreover, now that she thought about it, he was able to bite anyone he hugged without any hesitation. His flirting and seducing techniques were also very experienced. It was clear that he was a super stud horse who was used to doing this kind of thing. Jingwan also despised herself for falling for it so easily. She was so easily dazed by his kiss. Chapter 156. Li Hongyuan could clearly feel the change in Jingwan's mood. To be honest, he felt that it was a little strange. He didn't have many women in his previous life, but they weren't few either. They weren't much different from those maidservants who served him. Naturally, he couldn't expect to understand the temperament and preferences of those women. At that time, those women were his vassals, so naturally, they should follow his every whim. Later on, he met Wan and interacted with her for a period of time under special circumstances. He had some understanding of her, but that was after experiencing setbacks and tribulations. Perhaps her nature hadn't changed, but her temperament had definitely changed. She was definitely different from the Wan who still had the worries of a young girl. Although he started to understand her daily life a few years ago, that kind of understanding was only on the surface and couldn't touch her heart. If he wanted to understand her completely, he still had a long way to go. Li Hongyuan sighed in his heart. He was looking for trouble. However, there was no other way. Who asked him to want such a precious treasure? Not only her body, but more importantly, her heart. If he didn't want her to be like other women, he could only try to understand her. Then, no matter how big the punishment was, he still had to endure it. Li Hongyuan leaned back and stepped on the couch with one foot. He lifted Jingwan up to sit on his other leg and let her lie on his body. Her head was pressed against the side of his neck. He used his chin to gently rub her forehead and stroked her back with pure comfort. Then, he quietly hugged her and didn't do anything else. Jingwan was a little confused by him. Just a moment ago, he was full of lust and flirting with her in various ways. How did he become a warm man in the blink of an eye? This was completely wrong. Jingwan wanted to see what kind of expression he had at this moment. What? Wan still wants to apologize to this prince? Li Hongyuan didn't stop her and just chuckled before she got up. Jingwan paused for a moment and obediently lay back down on the bed. This time, Li Hongyuan's voice lasted a little longer. His chest vibrated along with the sound of his heartbeat. Jingwan subconsciously clenched her fist and punched him. Then, she realized that she had made a mistake again. This slightly coquettish punch was like an itch to Li Hongyuan, and it was especially aimed at his heart. Although he was a little restless, he restrained himself and reached out to hold her hand. "You have a bad temper." Jingwan didn't say anything and didn't pull her hand back. After the initial confusion, after she threw a little tantrum, her heart was now very shocked. Because of Li Hongyuan's attitude, he was taking her emotions into consideration and even indulging her. No matter how she thought about it, it wasn't right. Then, Jingwan unexpectedly thought of another characteristic of Li Hongyuan's 7 days of intense affection. She didn't know much about this point. She only knew a little from Sun Yijia's extremely dissatisfied nagging towards Jin Qinwang. He would give extreme affection to the beauties he fancied. As for the specifics, Sun Yijia didn't know. Then, did Jingwan have reason to suspect that everything he did to her today, whether it was the previous teasing or the current care, were all part of his intense affection? If every time this happened, he could restrain all of his bad temper and really hold a woman in the palm of his hand, with a perfect skin and a tenderness that could drown people, it wouldn't be a difficult thing to fall for him. No wonder, she heard that every few days, many women would be infatuated with him and go crazy for him. However, once those few days passed, the gentle lover could transform into the cold king of hell. Don't expect to get even the slightest bit of pity from him. Jingwan wasn't sure if she had stepped into this kind of situation. She didn't know if after 7 days, she would be ruthlessly abandoned by him. Of course, her identity was different and it was impossible for her to stay by his side for 7 days. However, it seemed that the so-called 7 days of intense affection, 7 days was only the longest time limit. No one exceeded 7 days and the number of people who reached 7 days could be counted on one's fingers. It seemed that after 1 day, he would completely lose interest. Jing Wan thought that she had found the crux of the problem and relaxed instead. She even thought optimistically that since she was able to be doted on by Jin Qinwang, it meant that her appearance should be a little more beautiful than she thought. Or perhaps, it was just her identity that gave her extra points. Perhaps, after today, he would no longer pay attention to her. In any case, from the beginning, she only wanted a status. Because of Master Liao Chen's approval, as long as there were no uncontrollable accidents, she didn't need to think about breaking off the engagement. Thinking about Jin Qinwang's former fiancés, this kind of uncontrollable accident was something that Jing Wan would absolutely not allow. Seeing that she was his DI wife, at most, he should throw her in the inner courtyard of the Wangfu, and not another courtyard where he kept beauties. After all, that would also damage his face, right? Jingwan refused to think about more details at this time. Since Jin Qinwang was so interested in playing, then she would enjoy it. She wanted to see to what extent his so-called intense affection could pamper her. Li Hongyuan clearly felt that Jingwan's body had softened, unlike before when she was more or less tense. He didn't think that his pacification was the main reason for this. As for what it was, he couldn't think of it for a while. However, no matter what the reason was, for Jingwan to be able to lean on him like this, it was a scene that he had longed for too long. It was a rare enjoyment. If Li Hongyuan knew of Jingwan's thoughts, who knows what kind of expression he would have. However, Li Hongyuan was actually a person who wouldn't repent even in death. He would walk a path until it was dark. Even if he hit the southern wall, he would probably dig a hole and continue to walk. Perhaps in the future, when Jingwan led him around a corner, he would probably obediently follow. Therefore, Li Hongyuan felt that he and Jingwan would still have to grind after that. It was really the truth. Now, the two people's brain circuits were on completely different frequencies. The carriage fell into silence, and the expressionless faces of the people outside finally eased a little. However, when they thought that someone had endured for so long and finally had a chance to take advantage of her openly, they were afraid that this kind of thing would not be rare. Therefore, they could only feel depressed. Of course, the only one who was really depressed was Nanny Gong. The others were at most a little embarrassed after hearing the scene. In fact, since the King of Hell learned about this marriage from his father, he had been in a good mood recently. When he was in a good mood, it meant that the days of suffering of the people around him were reduced. According to their thoughts, it would be good if Luo Luo could marry into the king's mansion immediately. When the carriage stopped, Jingwan got up with Li Hongyuan and also sat up. The place where she didn't sit was unchanged. He reached out and rearranged the slightly messy hair ornaments on Jingwan's head. However, because he was not familiar with it, he accidentally hooked Jingwan's hair. Before Jingwan did anything, he felt distressed. He simply took off all the hair ornaments on her head that were just for decoration rather than fixing her hair. "I'll redo it later. Are you hungry? Let's go eat something." In fact, it was still early to eat. However, compared to the two of them staying in this enclosed space, it was better to go out. Therefore, she nodded. According to Li Hongyuan's idea, he wanted to directly carry Jingwan off the carriage, but Jingwan firmly refused. Li Hongyuan did not argue with her and got off the carriage before Jingwan. Then, when Jingwan came out, he naturally reached out to help her down. Jingwan paused for a moment before reaching out and placing her hand in his palm. Jingwan felt that it was somewhat inconceivable that the rumored temperamental, cold and ruthless Jin Qinwang could lower himself to this extent when he was favoring her. Those women who were born and raised here and whose status was far inferior to hers, she was afraid that they would be overwhelmed by this favor and would be one step closer to falling into his hands. It was no wonder that Jingwan's thoughts couldn't be turned around. It was just that no matter how she looked at it, it didn't seem like it was the first time that he had done this kind of thing. According to common sense, for a person like him, after getting off the carriage, it would be good if he could just stand there and wait for you. Don't mention Jingwan, even the people who served by Li Hongyuan's side were all unusually shocked. Because of the assassination at Bai Long Temple, Li Hongyuan's bodyguards who belonged to the other factions had all been removed. It looked like there might be people from other factions, but in fact, they were all loyal to Li Hongyuan. Even if they were not as close as the group of people who were closest to Li Hongyuan, they more or less knew about his matters. They knew that there was a person at the top of their master's heart. After the marriage was confirmed, they also knew that that person was the current future Wang Fei. However, when they saw this scene with their own eyes, they were even more clear about the position of the future Wang Fei in their master's heart. After the Wang Fei married into the master's family, how should they treat her? They obediently lowered their heads and looked down. Daring to stare at the future Wang Fei, did they want their eyeballs to be dug out? After standing still, Jingwan looked around. Unexpectedly, she had already entered an elegant courtyard. There were winding streams, small bridges, pavilions, flowers, and rockery. To some extent, it was very in line with Jingwan's preferences. When Nanny Gong's serious gaze landed on her head, Jingwan suddenly felt awkward. There was also an inexplicable shyness. She slightly lowered her head and felt a little helpless, as if she had been caught doing something bad by the head of the household. Li Hongyuan glanced at Nanny Gong, took Jingwan's hand, and stepped directly on the small bridge in front of them. Nanny Gong didn't feel anything about the living king of hell's eyes that couldn't wait to kill her completely. She just lamented for Jingwan in her heart. As soon as the status was confirmed, the living king of hell began to devour it blatantly. The girl was afraid that, passing through the garden, they went directly into the attic on the opposite side. This attic was different from other places. First of all, it was quite spacious. There were only a few main pillars supporting it and a guardrail at the edge. The other places were empty, and there were curtains hanging above. After the two entered hand in hand, a few maids quietly put down the curtains. And the furnishings inside were all luxurious, elegant, and stylish. However, Jingwan's eyes unexpectedly fell on the big bed with a cone-shaped sandman hanging on it. She looked back at the man beside her. Even if it was bottomless, Jingwan seemed to feel a cluster of flames. Chapter 157. Under his burning gaze, Jingwan subconsciously wanted to shake off his hand, but in the end, there was no need to mention it. What did he mean by compared to the two of us staying in this enclosed space, it's better to go out? It was obviously better to stay in the carriage, where a certain someone only kissed and hugged, and didn't do anything out of line. But now, it was obvious that he wanted to eat her up. Jingwan was really a little panicked at this time, and she wanted to turn around and run away immediately. Her hand was still held by him, and even if he didn't use much strength, Jingwan couldn't shake it off. In the end, she lowered her head, pursed her lips and kept silent, and didn't make any crazy movements to struggle desperately. This was the territory of the living king of hell. If he really wanted to do something to her, then even if she could shake him off, she would definitely not be able to get out of this courtyard. Moreover, the result of struggling was bound to be embarrassing. If he let her go out, then what awaited her was bound to be surrounded by people. Not only would her reputation be ruined, but the Luo family would also lose face. A person like him probably wouldn't allow anyone to disobey him, and if she really angered him, she was afraid that she would suffer worse treatment. Although Jingwan was flustered, she didn't lose her head. She very rationally weighed the pros and cons, and then gradually calmed down. After calming down, she even had the leisure to think about other things. She should have thought about what might happen next, and it could also be considered as a part of the great favor. In the eyes of these powerful men, other means of favor were just supplementary. The real favor should be in bed. To be favored by them, that was the blessing of 8 lifetimes. At this moment, the little bit of affection Jingwan once had for Li Hongyuan shattered into pieces. At first, she didn't shake him off, but then she didn't do anything else, and the slight trembling of her body disappeared in an instant. From these reactions, he could roughly guess her thoughts. The fire in Li Hongyuan's eyes extinguished. She clearly knew the situation she might face, but she was still so calm and rational. Was this the reaction of a normal girl? If she was unwilling, she would want to escape regardless of the consequences. If she was willing, she should be shy and nervous. Li Hongyuan added another piece of strong evidence to his previous speculation. Li Hongyuan had never been a good person. Even if it was the person he loved the most, he wouldn't be soft-hearted when scheming. He admitted that he wanted Jingwan so much that he wanted to be close to her, and wanted to tie her to his side all the time. Therefore, even though he knew that his image in her heart would become more and more unbearable, he still wouldn't let her go as she wished. Other things could be discussed and could satisfy her, but there was absolutely no room for discussion. Li Hongyuan knew Jingwan's thoughts, but he wouldn't give any promises. He was notorious. The more sweet words he said, the more he would be seen as a flowery mouth, and it would only have the opposite effect. Therefore, towards Jingwan, at least before she fell in love with him, there were many words that couldn't be said. He could only use actions to tell her, and use time to tell her. Li Hongyuan pulled Jingwan's hand and sat down at a low table, taking Jingwan to sit in his arms. If she didn't see wrongly, this should be a cushion used for kneeling. Sitting on the ground without any image or rules, Wang, where are your etiquette and upbringing? Jingwan then noticed that there were a lot of seasonal fruits on the table. There was a bright red watermelon cut to the size of a thumb, and the seeds were carefully picked out, a bright red skin that looked like a lychee that had just been picked, a large cherry that looked very attractive. There was also a yellow pineapple that had been peeled and cut, a black bayberry that was full of water, sparkling and translucent crystal grapes. Most of the production areas weren't in the capital, and, whether it was preservation or transportation, it was inconvenient. But these things all looked fresh, not damaged, and there wasn't the smell of fermentation. 2 servant maids brought over a basin of water and other things. They knelt on the ground in a well-behaved manner and raised the basin to a suitable height. Li Hongyuan personally took off the things on Jingwan's wrist and placed them on a tray at the side. Then he held Jingwan's hand and dipped it into the water. The temperature of the water was just right. Raising the water, he washed the 2 pairs of hands, one big and one small, and took a cloth towel to wipe the water off the hands. Until the servant maids left without making the slightest sound, Jingwan didn't take the initiative to move a finger. The servant maids were so indifferent that their eyelids didn't even move. It could be seen that they were used to it. In reality, the servant maids were very shocked. It was just that the living king of hell's tyrannical power was too strong. They shouldn't make any movements, say any words, or even make any expressions that they shouldn't make. Is there anything you like? Li Hongyuan held Jingwan's waist with one hand. He hesitated on the fruit platter for a moment, then picked up a cherry and sent it to Jingwan's mouth. Try it. Jingwan tilted her head to look at him. This wasn't her previous life, and transportation was very inconvenient. How much manpower, money, and material resources did he spend to achieve this step? Did His Majesty bestow this to Prince? Li Hongyuan's expression was gentle, and the corner of his mouth had a faint smile. There isn't any in the palace. If Imperial Father wasted money like this, the Imperial Censor will nag him to death. Jingwan thought that he dared to casually use the word death on His Majesty. He really didn't care about taboo at all. The only person who can do such a wasteful thing is probably this prince. However, in any case, I still have to leave some face for other people. These were all privately brought back by this prince. Li Hongyuan casually pointed at cherries, lychees, and the like. A lot of these were used up on the road. When we reached the capital, there wasn't much left. If you want to eat, there's more than enough. He once again sent the cherry to Jingwan's mouth. Try it. He said it as if he had specially brought it for her. Don't make her look like a demon concubine. However, whether it was true or not, she wasn't in a position to persuade him right now. Jingwan opened her mouth, but before she could take it, Li Hongyuan took advantage of the situation and stuffed it into her mouth. His fingertips lingered in her mouth for a moment, sweeping the tip of her tongue. When he saw Jingwan's eyes unconsciously widen, he very naturally took his hand out and slowly moved it to his lips. Then, he stuck out his tongue and licked it, his eyes staring straight at her. Jingwan couldn't help but blush and abruptly turn her head away. Bastard, will you die if you don't tease people? Li Hongyuan's smile became even more obvious, as if he didn't notice Jingwan's embarrassment at all. Is it good? Jingwan felt that he wasn't asking about the cherry in her mouth, but, Pa, his broken finger didn't have any taste at all. It wasn't good at all. Her mouth moved and her mouth was overflowing with the unique sweetness of cherries. It was a very pure taste and was quite good. Li Hongyuan suddenly leaned forward again and kissed Jingwan's lips. He parted her lips and teeth for a while before pulling away. At the same time, he took the cherry in Jingwan's mouth with him. He turned his head and spat it out onto the empty plate on the table. When Jingwan saw Li Hongyuan pick up another cherry, she directly covered her mouth with her handkerchief. "I'm not eating anymore." Li Hongyuan seemed to be rather regretful. He directly threw the cherry into his mouth, then brought the plate over and placed it next to Jingwan's hand. His meaning was obvious. He wouldn't touch her mouth anymore. If she liked to eat, then she could eat without worry. Having something to do to distract her, even if it was just eating, seemed to be better than looking at him. As expected, Li Hongyuan did as he said. He just watched Jingwan eat the entire time. There weren't many cherries on the plate, and Jingwan finished them one by one. She didn't know if it was because she saw Li Hongyuan spit out the cherry or because of some other reason, but Jingwan didn't eat as gently as she usually did. "Try the others." Li Hongyuan took a lychee and peeled it. "I'm really not eating anymore." Jingwan shook her head. "Just one. Try the rest as well." Since it was delivered to her mouth, she naturally couldn't refuse. It was acceptable to eat a little of everything. After feeding Jingwan until she was full, Li Hongyuan also began to be restless. He hugged Jingwan and buried his head in her neck. Jingwan put her hands on his shoulders and even raised her head, adopting a welcoming posture. However, she unconsciously tightened her grip on Li Hongyuan's clothes. Her eyes were misty and her body was trembling slightly. All of this showed that even if she had prepared herself mentally, she still couldn't calm down. Feeling Li Hongyuan taking off her clothes, Jingwan couldn't help but cry. She bit her lip. When her outer clothes were taken off, Jingwan said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness, don't humiliate me." This was her last plea, and also her last struggle. In the end, she was different from the beauties he kept. If she lost her chastity before marriage, it would be fine if she married other men. However, he was a prince, a member of the imperial family. His dignity couldn't be lowered, and his face couldn't be swept away. It would implicate the entire Luo family. With so many people watching, even if it was fake, it was very likely that it would be discovered by the experienced and astute maids in the palace. That would be an even bigger crime. And if others scolded her, it wouldn't be as simple as being shameless. Li Hongyuan paused. As long as it was a girl from a decent family, they would only receive a little bit of vague knowledge about love from their mother or close female elders before marriage. Before marriage, if they didn't personally experience it, they wouldn't know what it meant to be completely humiliated and lose one's chastity. However, she knew about WNWN, and she was very clear about it. It couldn't have been the Luo family who told her. Didn't this once again prove that she had an extraordinary background? Thinking that she might have personally experienced it, Li Hongyuan's heart was so crazy that he wanted to kill someone. However, when he thought about what she said in her past life, and the fact that he had more than one or two women, he had no reason to do anything to WNWAN. And the man that he wanted to chop into minced meat would never be found. Thus, he threw all those annoying things aside and just enjoyed the moment. How could he not feel Jingwan's forbearance? However, he had endured for so long before he could have a taste of her openly today. If he just gave up like this, he would doubt whether he was still a man. Stabilizing his already chaotic breathing, he raised his head and held her face, letting her look into his eyes. His eyes were filled with endless gentleness and heat, and he kissed away her tears bit by bit. The salty taste. Fool, the most precious thing naturally has to be saved for the wedding night. This was his eyeball, his heart and liver. He was afraid that she would melt in his mouth and fall in his hands. If he held her in his hands too tightly, he was afraid that she would stop breathing. If he held her too loosely, he was afraid that she would fly away. How could he bear to let her be humiliated? How could he let her have the slightest possibility of not being able to raise her head in the future? Perhaps it was really because he was too gentle at this moment. Jingwan believed his words and unconsciously relaxed. She even unconsciously curved her lips into a smile. Li Hongyuan's heart fiercely clenched. This silly girl, did she only ask for this little bit? Does Wang Ye like me? Jingwan said as if she was joking. Yuan, like very much. Li Hongyuan softly opened his mouth, but it was unprecedentedly serious. Jingwan inexplicably felt that what he said was true. He really liked her, at least at this moment, he liked her. She couldn't escape, couldn't hide, she didn't want to make it look like a murder scene, and it seemed that there was no need to pretend to be a dead fish. Moreover, Jingwan felt that Wang was such a master of the brothel. She hadn't done anything before, but she had already ruthlessly witnessed his high-level methods. When he really moved, she couldn't say how she would be aroused. This physiological reaction was not something that could be controlled by reason. Under the premise that she could keep her bottom line, why not experience the things that made countless men and women go crazy in any era and any background? In his eyes, she was completely reflected. Jingwan trembled as she kissed his lips. It was no longer fear, worry, or even despair, but only nervousness. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows with some surprise. In fact, Wan's understanding of this aspect was also not bad. Although it was less fun to teach her from scratch, it was also more interesting. It wasn't the first time that they kissed, but she was still so nervous. It could only be said that at this moment, she was sincerely taking the initiative to kiss him. Her heart wanted to kiss him. This knowledge made Li Hongyuan's body and mind feel very happy. Gong Mima stood outside the door, watching the atmosphere between the two of them change little by little. She knew that Miss falling into the hands of this living king of hell, in the end, would definitely not have a good fruit to eat. But she could only look on helplessly as the former mistress carried the current mistress onto the bed. Spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, she closed the door tightly. Then, she turned around and dutifully opened the door. It must be said that what Miss was doing now was actually the same in nature as fourth Miss before. However, she couldn't produce the slightest bit of malice towards her Miss. Even if she completely lost her virginity in the end, that was because she was abducted by that bastard. This was the relationship between closeness and estrangement. After about an hour, there was gradually no more movement inside. Gong Mama's hearing was extraordinary. She basically heard everything from beginning to end. From Miss's reaction, Wang Ye really did what he said and didn't let Miss lose her virginity. At the same time, she was relieved. In fact, she admired him for being able to endure so much. Jingwan felt that the last of her strength was gone. Her whole body was soft and without any strength. She didn't want to move a single finger. She didn't manage to become like this in the end. When that day really came, what happened to lingering in the flower bushes, excessive drinking, and women, and weak body? Were they all eaten by dogs? Well, she only heard that Wang Ye was fond of beauty. She didn't say that he was overly indulgent. Moreover, in the few times they met, there was no time when his complexion was not good. He actually knew how to control himself. It really wasn't easy. However, when they got married in the future, Jingwan would recall the word control that was given today. Her face would hurt for a long time. She felt that she was beaten into a pig's face every day. Wang Ye, can you loosen your grip a little? It was simply like being entangled by a python. Was it necessary to hug so tightly? Chapter 158. Your Highness, can you loosen your grip? It was as if she was being entangled by a giant python. Was it necessary to hug her so tightly? Li Hongyuan, who had his eyes closed, heard her words. Not only did he not loosen his grip, he turned over and pressed Jingwan under his body. Jingwan took a deep breath. The weight of a grown man, and a strong one at that. Was he trying to crush her to death without letting him eat his fill? Did he have to be so ruthless? Sensing Jingwan's deathbed struggle, Li Hongyuan finally moved his conscience away. He didn't care that his chin was still resting on Jingwan's shoulder. His face was close to hers, and he whispered in her ear, "Jiao Jiao, Jiao Jiao." That's right, Li Hongyuan didn't call her WN anymore. It was only because she had suddenly made such a request a moment ago. Who was Li Hongyuan? He immediately thought of the cause and effect. He already knew that Jingwan had misunderstood him and treated her as a substitute for another woman. Although he was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood, in a situation where he couldn't explain himself, this misunderstanding was actually the most reasonable explanation for his words and actions towards her. In fact, he could actually tell what Luo Peishan had said to Jingwan, that he cared about her. But he knew that she could accept the cruelest truth and didn't like it when others lied to her. Therefore, even if his lie would never be exposed, he didn't want to lie to her. Moreover, based on his own unusual experience, he inferred that Jingwan was also unusual. It was hard to guarantee that Jingwan wouldn't discover any clues in their future interactions. He didn't want to make her unhappy with a lie now. Midway, Jingwan's small request made Li Hongyuan quite happy. Even if Jingwan didn't say anything, he could guess what she was thinking. Although he wasn't happy to be used by his wife, it was the most gentle way to achieve his goal. However, other than this title, she didn't care about anything related to him. Perhaps, she would even feel guilty towards him because she used him. After they got married, she would use him as a good wife to make it up to him. Her sudden request showed that she cared. At least at that moment, she didn't want to be someone else's substitute, even if she wasn't sure if he was thinking about her or WNWAN. This realization made Li Hongyuan happy, but at the same time, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As a result, he stopped calling her WAN. Instead, he gave her a nickname that didn't match her at all, but was the target of his hard work, Jiao Jiao. He raised her to be Jiao Jiao. After that, he became even more ruthless. Li Hongyuan closed his eyes and kissed her shoulder, which had changed color. "Do you like it?" Jingwan's face turned red. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and spoke without thinking. "Shut up." Li Hongyuan chuckled. "Jiao Jiao, what kind of nonsense are you thinking about? A good girl should be reserved." Was she thinking about something crazy? She wasn't reserved. She even dared to play the blame game. Jingwan gnashed her teeth in anger. This bastard, hooligan, and pervert. Jingwan even suspected that she had returned to her real 14-15 years old self. Otherwise, how could she be so easily provoked by him? She really wanted to bite him alive. In any case, he was a prince. How could he be so shameless and shameless? At the very least, he should have some poise, right? It turned out that it was all eaten up by dogs. He knew that Jingwan was sulking, but he was very happy. Sure enough, compared to her calm and collected self, he preferred her lively and lively. Perhaps it wouldn't be as difficult to raise WAN into Jiao Jiao as he had expected. Another thing that made Li Hongyuan happy was that after this intimate contact, he was at least 70% sure that his obedient Jiao Jiao had never experienced the matters between a man and a woman. Although he had already said that no matter what her background or experience was, he would accept it all without reservation, but when he thought that she would only belong to him, he couldn't help but feel particularly happy. In reality, Li Hongyuan's possessiveness had been very strong since he was young. It was just that in his previous life, he restrained himself and didn't show it so obviously. Later on, when he became the emperor, the world was his, and there wasn't anything that he particularly wanted to possess. After his rebirth, it was different. In addition, when he was the emperor, he was used to being overbearing and willful, so he didn't restrain himself at all. As a result, some of his actions towards Jingwan were attributed to his possessiveness by his old man. Li Hongyuan touched Jingwan's hair that had already been separated. It was soft and smooth, and the hair was still black and shiny all the way to the tip. There were no forks, so it could be seen that it had been carefully maintained. "Are you hungry? How about I have someone prepare the meal?" Jingwan was half pressed down by him. Even if she wanted to look at him, she couldn't do it. Her heart was somewhat complicated. In fact, she was now doubting the so-called great favor. Thinking back on the past 2 hours, excluding those parts where he specifically teased people, his actions, even if it was in her previous life, she basically couldn't find a man who would do it to this extent. What's more, in a feudal society where men were superior and women were inferior, if they didn't rely on men, it would be extremely difficult for a woman to survive. Under this kind of background, The other party was a dignified Qin Wang, the emperor's favored son. Male chauvinism and self-centeredness, this was normal. Their so-called favor should be more material. In other aspects, it was mostly indulgence and a bit of gentleness. But if the beauties that Jin Qinwang kept, it was said that they all came from very humble backgrounds. The best were probably those girls from the down-and-out official's family. The proportion of these people was very small. Most of them came from brothels, dance halls, opera troupes, and there were also some commoner women. Upbringing and environment determined one's self-cultivation, bearing, and even taste. Jin Qinwang, who was born in the imperial family, received the best upbringing. The palace maids that he came in contact with, their appearance and words were all first class. Even if he left the palace and opened a residence, his taste had changed. But could these women make him change his self-title from Ben Wang to I? Could they let him take care of them everywhere, putting the other party first in everything? Some of the things that were served by the maidservants, he would personally take care of them. If it was just a woman that he loved to the bones, there might be some possibility. But those favor didn't last more than 7 days, and he would throw them away after playing with them. He dared to talk back to the emperor, brazenly punish his brothers, ignore the forbidden laws, and attack the court officials. Would such a person lower himself for those women? Was it possible? She, who gave him the title of Sheng Dote, had a problem with her brain. In the end, it was still because of the WNWAN that he spoke of. Jingwan was really curious. What kind of woman was the other party, to be able to make Jin Qinwang, this kind of deep affection, so deep that she was just a substitute, yet he could hold her in the palm of his hand. But, such an important person, why didn't third sister-in-law mention a single word? It couldn't be that she was hidden so tightly that the people outside didn't even hear a bit of the news, right? But, was Jin Qinwang the kind of person who would hide things? So, no matter what kind of situation it was, there seemed to be something that didn't make sense. Since she couldn't figure it out, she decided not to think about it anymore. Her stomach was hungry now. Moreover, this exercise, in addition to the fact that it was already summer, not to mention that it was countless times more tiring than her usual exercise, the degree of stickiness also multiplied. It was unbearable. Freshen up first. Okay. Li Hongyuan rubbed Jingwan's face, sat up, and pulled Jingwan up. He pulled the thin quilt over and wrapped her tightly. Someone come. Gong Momo pushed the door and entered, respectfully and properly. Does Wang Ye and Miss want water? She understood Jingwan's habits very well. En. Li Hongyuan faintly answered. Gong Momo withdrew. Jingwan watched Gong Momo leave for a short period of time and didn't raise her head. But even so, Jingwan still couldn't help but shrink into the quilt, leaving only the parts above her eyes exposed. Li Hongyuan looked at it and found it funny. Ben Wang, I should have no problem bathing and changing your clothes. But, if you want to freshen up, you still have to let your mama do it. So, it was useless to do anything now. In a while, she still had to face it. Really have no prospects. You are her master. Jingwan glared at him angrily. There was still a hint of spring in the corner of her eyes, but it wasn't threatening at all. Instead, it made a certain someone's heart flutter. He reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. Don't tempt me. Otherwise, you probably won't be able to go home today. Jingwan looked away and took a deep breath, telling herself not to argue with this bastard. 4 servant girls carried in an oversized bathtub that was meant for 2 people. It was obviously filled with water, but the 4 of them looked no different from ordinary servant girls. They carried it steadily and even seemed to be very relaxed. If one looked closely, one wouldn't notice anything when they were separated. But when one looked at them as a whole, one would discover that their movements were shockingly identical. Because of this discovery, Jingwan suddenly raised her head to look at Li Hongyuan. Then, their eyes met. It felt as if Li Hongyuan had been looking at her all this time. It felt as if something was out of control. It wasn't a good feeling. What's wrong? Do you have something to say to me? Li Hongyuan gently caressed her slightly swollen lips. Nothing. He clearly told her that he wasn't as nothing as the outside world said. She had already guessed that he wasn't as simple as he seemed. But why did he tell her these secrets so easily? What was his intention? Could it be that he wanted to win over grandfather? Jingwan was slightly annoyed. She had overreacted. Li Hongyuan was also very helpless towards his wife's unnecessary worries. He had these people serve him because they were completely loyal to him. They definitely wouldn't reveal anything about him. It was all for the sake of this silly girl's reputation. Otherwise, if today's matter were to spread, even if he didn't completely devour her, the nature would be the same. After the servant girls left, Li Hongyuan lifted the quilt and carried Jingwan off the bed. He walked around the screen and approached the bathtub. He stretched out his long legs and stepped in. Then, he submerged their bodies into the water. Li Hongyuan lifted her chin and teased, "What's wrong? Are you still shy now?" It would have been better if he didn't say it. Now that he said it, Jingwan couldn't help but blush. However, she felt that her reaction was too cowardly. Previously, she was the one who took off this person's clothes. If she was shy now, wouldn't it be a joke in front of him? So, she tried her best to remain calm and let the blush on her face fade as soon as possible. This guy let her discover his secret. Was he just going to let it go and not say a word? Jingwan continued to think about the problem just now. Chapter 159. Such a carefree laugh, in Jingwan's eyes, was an ear-piercing mockery. This time, not only did her face turn red, her entire body seemed to be boiling hot. Jingwan held back her restless claws. She warned herself that the other party was a prince and had a noble status, so she couldn't hit him. But this bastard was really too much. His arrogant laughter continued for a long time. Jingwan turned around to face him. Her legs were apart as she knelt on either side of Li Hongyuan's thighs. Her hands were on his shoulders. Compared to before, her posture was naturally a bit taller. The part that was previously submerged in the water was exposed to the air. Li Hongyuan was dazzled. His laughter naturally disappeared, but the corners of his mouth were still hooked. His hands didn't move. He even calmly leaned back and spread his arms on the edge of the tub. His posture was welcoming her teasing and tasting as she pleased. Under his deep and teasing gaze, Jingwan was still terrified. For this kind of thick-skinned and hungry wolf who hadn't eaten his fill, teasing him was the same as sending herself to his door to take advantage of her. She withdrew her hands and stepped back. Her body sank into the water and the water directly reached her chin. Li Hongyuan was originally waiting for Jingwan to settle accounts with him. Sure enough, she was shy. Being stripped of his clothes by her was already something that could only be encountered by chance. Li Hongyuan was quite regretful. However, his Jiao would obediently throw herself into his arms one day. There was no rush. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future. He reached out and pulled her over. He felt Jingwan's resistance. "I won't tease you. Let me hug you." In the end, his wife was still a bit young. Even if she hadn't lost her virginity, he didn't dare to go too far. It would harm her body. And if he was provoked again, he would be the only one to suffer. Jingwan looked at him very suspiciously, but in the end, she didn't argue with him. If she didn't comply with him, when he made a move, she would be the one to suffer. She followed his strength and snuggled into his arms. Her back leaned against his chest and her head leaned back on his shoulder. She relaxed her body that still hadn't fully recovered. Li Hongyuan splashed some water on Jingwan's shoulder. "I was wondering if Jiao was going to use the same method to shut me up again." He sighed regretfully. Sealing it with a kiss, "You wish." Jingwan thought that he couldn't see it and rolled her eyes. "You dare to roll your eyes at me." Jiao's courage is indeed not small. Having been caught, Jingwan felt uncomfortable and speechless at the same time. "Why do you keep staring at her?" "I think His Highness was mistaken." "All right, whatever Jiao says. However, didn't I tell you to call me Yun? Why are you calling me Prince now?" Jingwan smiled. "How can this subject call Your Highness by his name?" She could call him anything she wanted in bed. That was just for fun. If she still called him that after they were done, it would be disgraceful. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows, but didn't continue to pursue the matter. When this girl was stubborn, even 9 oxen couldn't pull her back. Your Highness, Miss. Mema Gong's voice sounded from outside the screen. What's the matter? Li Hongyuan asked indifferently. Replying to Your Highness, Mrs. Meals are always punctual. She must be hungry now. This servant has prepared some snacks for Miss to fill her stomach first. Please allow it, Your Highness. As usual, Mema Gong spoke neither hurriedly nor slowly. Li Hongyuan rubbed Jingwan's stomach. It was this prince who didn't think it through. He kissed Jingwan's forehead. Jiao Jiao, eat first. Then let your mama help you bathe. When she's done, we'll eat together. When he finished speaking, he moved Jingwan a little further away and stepped out of the bathtub. He casually grabbed a robe from the side and put it on. Then, he tied the robe around his waist. His movements were casual and unhurried. Disregarding everything else, just looking at him right now, this man had a fatal attraction. Li Hongyuan tossed his hair behind his back. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Jingwan leaning against the edge of the bathtub and looking at him. Her small eyes were filled with pure praise and appreciation. All right, it's not bad that this body can attract Wan's attention. He stepped forward and tapped the tip of her nose. What, have you been charmed by this prince? Jingwan raised her head to look at him and suddenly smiled. Your Highness is boundlessly handsome. Everyone loves you. Flowers bloom when they see you. Li Hongyuan raised his eyebrows. Does she have resentment in her heart and want to find a way to tease him back? It doesn't matter if other people love me or not. Having Jiao Jiao's love is enough. Little girl, with this level of skill, she still wants to tease me. Li Hongyuan calmly walked away barefooted. In fact, it wasn't impossible for him to wash Jingwan clean from head to toe. Compared to Jingwan being seen naked by other people, he was quite willing. However, he had never served anyone before. He was afraid that it would take a lot of time. If he didn't do it right, he would make Jingwan wait with an empty stomach. He would also feel distressed. He could only give up and wait for another day. Jingwan was depressed and speechless. She, this little rookie, shouldn't go and arm wrestle with other people whose skills have long been maxed out. Gong Mema held the pastries and turned around the screen to look at the marks on Jingwan's shoulders that were different from the color of her skin. Even if it wasn't the first time she saw it, she still found it hard to calm down. Miss, Gong Mema put the tray on the table next to the bathtub. Try these pastries and see if they are to your liking. If they are not, newbie will go and change them. Because Jingwan was uncomfortable, she shrank her body and didn't notice Gong Mema's matter-of-fact tone in Jin Qinhuang's territory. Because Gong Mema had always been an upright person, she was really afraid that her behavior would make her unhappy. She wrapped her arms around her chest and wanted to cover the marks on her body. However, there were marks all over her body. How could she cover it up? Instead, there was a smell of wanting to cover it up. Mema, Gong Mema reached out and began to wash Jingwan's hair. This is not Miss's fault. Miss doesn't need to care about it. It's just that this man can't be pampered or indulged. They are used to giving an inch for a foot. Therefore, Miss should refuse when you should refuse. If you comply with everything he wants, the only one who will suffer will be yourself. Originally, her skin was as white as snow, but now, it definitely wouldn't disappear in a few days. That living Hell King didn't want to let Miss know before because he had some misgivings. This time, it was not an ordinary kind of ruthless. Jingwan was speechless. Mema, your style seems to be a bit wrong. However, Jingwan chose to keep quiet at this time. She said in her heart, Mema, the other person is a Wang Ye. The consequences of refusing will be very serious. Moreover, your family's miss, I am also not living up to expectations. I can't help but sink into it. Therefore, this thing really does a lot of harm. After Gong Mema helped her wash her hair, she also loosened her muscles and bones. After Jingwan finished washing and drying her hair, she found that everything inside was very complete. The clothes were also prepared. They were brand new and fit her very well. It was as if the clothes were tailor-made. The material was of the highest quality, the workmanship was exquisite, the embroidery was first class, and there were also some ingenious little designs. In her opinion, the high-end goods from her previous life were probably just like this. Even if people were of the same age, there would be differences in height, weight, and weight. Moreover, she worked out all year round, so there were many parts of her body that were stronger than other girls. Although it wasn't to the extent that her muscles were protruding, the minute details of her body were still different. These clothes were definitely made according to her standard measurements. Originally, she thought that the other things here might have been used by unknown people, so she felt a little uncomfortable in her heart and didn't want to use them. However, upon closer inspection, it seemed that all of them were brand new. Moreover, from the way they were placed, it seemed that no one had moved them after they moved in. This intention. Jingwan frowned. Mama Gong saw Jingwan's expression, but didn't say anything. "Miss, please sit down first. This servant will comb your hair." Jingwan nodded. Jingwan heard the sound of footsteps. It was very light, but she knew who it was. Sure enough, when the person appeared, he was neat and tidy from head to toe, not a single hair out of place. However, he wasn't wearing the commonly seen black brocade clothes, but moonlight silk. That's right, it was blue moonlight silk. The surface seemed to be flowing with moonlight, and it looked extremely luxurious. Even the embroidery thread used on it had the same effect, and it didn't spoil the overall effect at all. Because of this set of clothes, it softened the violent aura on his body. In addition to his good mood, it complemented each other even more. Every move of his showed an extremely good bearing and cultivation. He was a complete nobleman. At the same time, that restrained aura gave him a confidence that the world was under his control. Because of this confidence, he was indifferent, calm, and even leisurely. Li Hongyuan took the comb from Mama Gong's hand and combed Jingwan's hair. Jingwan was about to say something, but she seemed to think of something. She hesitated and didn't say anything. As he combed Jingwan's hair bit by bit, he couldn't help but think of the time when he was with her in his previous life. No matter whether he had recovered or not, she would comb his hair every day. She was very attentive, careful, and gentle. Seeing Li Hongyuan in a daze, Mama Gong reminded him softly, "Your Highness." Li Hongyuan casually returned the comb to her and sat to the side. Eunuch Mu served him a cup of tea. At this time, the screen had been removed, the bathtub had been taken out, the floor and other places were cleaned, and needless to say, the bed outside was cleaned. Li Hongyuan sipped the tea leisurely and watched Mama Gong comb Jingwan's hair. Mama Gong's movements were swift, and it didn't take long for her to finish. She hesitated for a moment, and then opened one of the jewelry boxes on the dressing table. Inside was a set of light pink pearl head ornaments. Mama Gong's eyes brightened. She didn't need to look at other things, just this set was very suitable for this young lady's clothes. Jingwan looked at Mama Gong's impolite appearance and was speechless again. "This isn't you wake up quickly Jingwan found out that her mama seemed to have a big opinion of Jin Qinwang, but she couldn't do anything to the other party. So she used this kind of piling on the other party's things to take revenge on the other party. Thinking about what Mama Gong said before, it was right for her to throw a tantrum at Jin Qinwang. Now, it was also right for him to take revenge. Why did it seem like Jin Qinwang owed her? However, she didn't know where to put those things from before, so she couldn't refuse. Jingwan stood up and automatically turned in a circle in front of Li Hongyuan. "Does it look good?" No matter what, it was the other party's things. He should admire it, and at the same time, let him find a sense of accomplishment from her. Li Hongyuan nodded. His family's jiaojiao was really beautiful. Getting up, he pulled Jingwan's hand. "Let's go, let's eat." Jingwan was indeed hungry. Seeing the fruit on the table before, and the delicious dishes, her stomach became even hungrier. There were only 8 dishes and 2 soups. For a Qinwang's identity, it really wasn't much, but it looked like they were all excellent. Li Hongyuan waved away the maidservants who were preparing to serve the dishes, and personally ladled half a bowl of soup for Jingwan. Things that shouldn't be done by him, he had done it again and again. Jingwan was now a lot calmer, but politeness demands politeness. She also ladled half a bowl for Li Hongyuan. "Oh, is this the young couple having a meal intimately?" A teasing and frivolous voice sounded. Chapter 160. Compared to the last time at Rouge Pavilion, her clothes were thinner, her waist was tighter, and her breasts were even more swollen. She leisurely walked in like a cat, her plump buttocks swaying left and right. She charmingly smiled at Jingwan, blinked her eyes, and waved her hand at Jingwan in a flirtatious manner. At this moment, Jingwan really didn't know what kind of expression to take out to face her. On the contrary, Li Hongyuan didn't even lift his eyelids as he picked up a piece of fish with the bones removed and placed it in Jingwan's bowl. "Still not hungry? Hurry and eat." That attitude was as if he completely treated Yun Niang as an invisible person. Feeding his hungry wife was the most important thing. As for the rest, don't mention grandaunt. Even if imperial grandfather crawled out of the imperial mausoleum, he would have to stand aside. Seeing this, Jingwan hesitated for a moment. Her stomach was indeed hungry. It was true that the other party was once a princess, but she didn't know Ah. Moreover, she was in front of a certain Wang. Therefore, Jingwan concentrated on eating. Yun Niang saw a certain unfilial grandson ignoring her and her mood wasn't so wonderful. Princess He Yang, who was in a bad mood, rolled her eyes. That bellyful of bad water seemed to overflow from her eyes, and the red mole under the corner of her right eye became even redder. Swaying her waist, she walked to Li Hongyuan's side and boldly threw herself on Li Hongyuan's body. She stretched out her finger to point at Li Hongyuan's head. "You heartless man, forgetting the old when there's a new person. In vain, Nujia treated you wholeheartedly in vain, yet you are so heartless and cruel." While speaking, she pretended to rub the corner of her eye. Jingwan looked at her in surprise. She should say that she really deserved to be called the Princess He Yang who dared to raise a gigolo and was unrestrained, single-handedly beheading the Northern Han King. If it was another person, who would dare to casually throw herself on a man? Moreover, the other person was her own grandnephew. When she saw that Yun Niang deliberately pressed those two lumps on Jin Qinhuang's chest to change shape, she couldn't stop the corners of her mouth from twitching. Li Hongyuan's face was as dark as ink. Originally, it was not easy for him to hold the wife he had been longing for a long time today. Although he did not eat to his heart's content, it did not change the fact that he was in a good mood. Unfortunately, there was someone who did not know what was good for them and came to make trouble. Even his personal attendants did not allow them to get close to him, let alone an old woman who did not want to do it. In addition, the smell of cosmetics was completely different from Jiajiao's, which seriously affected his appetite. Scram! The living king of hell unleashed his tyrannical aura. He was furious, ruthless, and cold. The three words living king of hell were vividly displayed at this moment. Even though Princess He Yang, who had experienced great winds and waves, experienced killing on the battlefield, and had traveled extensively for several decades, at this moment, she still felt a burst of fear and trepidation. She had long known that this grandnephew was not simple. Among the princes, he was the most ferocious beast that lay dormant in the dark. Although she did not know what he did specifically, but every time the other princes suffered a great loss, he was most likely involved in it. Compared to the other grandnephews who abided by the rules and talked about bearing, but were actually just sanctimonious hypocrites, it was clear that Li Hongyuan, this grandnephew who did not take etiquette seriously like her, was more liked by her. However, this brat sometimes had a bad temper, as well as his private insidiousness and viciousness, which made people loathe him. Yun Niang paused, and then sat upright as if nothing had happened. She flung the fragrant handkerchief in her hand. "What's the matter? Are you worried that your wife will be jealous?" Li Hongyuan ignored her once again and patted Jingwan's head. At that moment, the intimidating aura he exuded earlier was gone. "Are you scared? Don't worry, Ben Wang will target anyone but you. Hurry up and eat, don't mind this old woman." Li Hongyuan was a bit frightening just now, but Jingwan was not frightened. She had a feeling of so the rumors were not false. In front of her, Wang really restrained his temper. It's just that, to say that Princess He Yang was an old woman, wasn't that the same as specifically picking on people to step on? Yun Niang looked much younger than her actual age. Her figure was well maintained, and the clothes she wore were more colorful. It could be seen that she cared a lot about her age and absolutely refused to accept that she was old. With a glance, sure enough, the one with a black face became Yun Niang. The seductive aura on her body was swept away, adding a bit of sharpness. Unfortunately, to Li Hongyuan, there was no threat at all. No matter what you did, he would remain unmoved. Moreover, this was his territory. If you annoyed him, it was possible that he would throw you out. This kind of thing, he would definitely do it. Speaking of how many men Yun Niang had played in the palm of her hand in this lifetime, she had suffered a big loss at Li Hongyuan's hands. She had always wanted to secretly make up for it, but it was very obvious that she had not been successful. As for using his secret to threaten him, she was afraid that as soon as there was a sign of that, he would have already silenced her. Yun Niang was very clear about this point. Ever since she received some information about Li Hongyuan's nature, he directly sent a person to her. Serving was one aspect, but as for the nature of it, everyone was well aware. Yun Niang calmly accepted it and used it without the slightest trace of politeness. Yun Niang couldn't do anything to him. She rolled her eyes and her gaze fell on Jing Wan. Then, she thought about the attitude this king of hell had towards her and shifted her gaze. "Little girl, do you know who I am?" Jingwan hesitated for a moment, but still decided to tell the truth. "I heard grandmother mention it." "Oh, Luo Chensha? Why did she mention this servant to you?" Yun Niang asked with interest. "Because after seeing Yun Niang in Rouge Pavilion, I went back and mentioned it to grandmother. Grandmother said that it must be you. After all, she had a deep impression of you. Speaking of which, she could not expose her own nanny. On the contrary, it was better to let her grandmother take the blame. Yun Niang would not go to her grandmother to ask for confirmation, so the lie would not be exposed. Oh, Luo Chensha should have a deep impression of this servant. After all, this servant almost pulled your grandfather to bed at that time." Yun Niang giggled like a young girl. Jingwan laughed and shook her head. Things are different from what Yun Niang thought. Grandmother said that Yun Niang has a good memory and has seen a lot. Although you are a girl, you do what men do. You care about the country and the world. Women are not inferior to men. Moreover, your heart is more tender to women than men. Even many women are still moved by you. Grandmother even said that if Yuning was not married, she might also fall in love with you. Did Luo Chensha really say that? Yun Niang laughed and patted the table. If this is the case, why should I care about Luo Peishan? I should just hook up with Luo Chensha. Seeing that Yun Niang revealed her true colors, Jingwan coughed softly and chuckled. Yun Niang, image, lady. Turning her eyes, Yun Niang revealed a coquettish expression and even gave Jingwan a shy smile. "Don't be so pretentious and disgusting here." Li Hongyuan said lightly. "Can your wife make you pregnant?" "Disgusting my ass." Yun Niang retorted without any trace of politeness. Cough. Jingwan choked and coughed, quickly covering her mouth. She was indeed Princess Heiyang. When she became fierce, she was really. Li Hongyuan glanced at her coldly. "Watch your words. If you lead Jiao Jiao astray, this prince will burn down your Rouge Pavilion." Yun Niang suddenly reached out and pulled Jingwan's arm. She rolled up her sleeve and saw the red plum blossoms on it. Seeing this, she sneered. "Do you think you are a good person? Would a normal man do such a thing to his fiancée? Burn down my Rouge Pavilion? Right now, your wife has a share. If you have the guts, then go burn it." Li Hongyuan slapped her hand away and rolled down Jingwan's sleeve. "If I burn down your Rouge Pavilion, this prince can give her a bigger one." He was very rich and overbearing, very disdainful. "Why don't you ask if your wife is willing to be raised by you?" Yun Niang felt that this Luo family's third daughter was actually very similar to her in some aspects. She had never thought of relying on a man. This time, Yun Niang simply poked a hornet's nest. How could Jingwan be the same as this old woman? Wan indeed did not rely on a man, but it did not mean that she would accept anything. She did not rely on feelings. She wanted to be equal and never betray each other. Material things were just an additional product on this foundation. If she accepted you as her person, then whatever you gave her, no matter how much it was, she would gladly accept it. The problem now was that Jingwan did not care, because she did not care about him, so she did not care about what he gave her. He wanted to raise Jingwan into Jiaojiao, he wanted to give Jingwan the best and most things in the world, but the most important problem was not solved. At that moment, Yun Niang only felt that she was being targeted by a poisonous snake that could bite her at any time. She would die in an instant. Her scalp was numb and her back was cold. "Are you on?" Jingwan reached out and placed her hand on the back of Li Hongyuan's hand. Li Hongyuan instantly returned to his senses. Seeing Jingwan's slender hand, he suddenly hooked his lips into a smile, as if spring had returned to the earth. He turned his hand and held Jingwan's hand. "It's been half a day and you haven't eaten much. Hurry up and eat, otherwise the dishes will be cold. If you have anything to say it after you finish eating." It really made people see how temperamental he could be. But Jingwan did not know why she blurted out his name, so quickly forgetting the awkwardness caused by Yun Niang rolling up her sleeve. What was even more inconceivable was that Jin Qinhuang's heart was so easily appeased by her. It seemed that her influence on him was so deep that it was somewhat inconceivable. Jingwan suppressed the doubts and uneasiness in her heart and nodded her head. Yun Niang narrowed her eyes, containing a deep sharpness, looking at Li Hongyuan. Then, she looked at Jingwan with a profound gaze. She did not tactfully disturb their meal and slowly got up. "Come find me after you finish eating," regarding the situation at the western border. Then, her figure swayed as she left. "Jiao, don't worry about her. She's just the owner of a rouge shop." If the situation at the border was not mentioned, she was indeed just the owner of a rouge shop. But when it came to the Qi Yuan dynasty, then she was the one who killed the king of the northern Xiongnu, the one who reversed the deadlock between the Qi Yuan and the northern Xiongnu, Princess He Yang. Also, he seemed to intend to let her know more things about him, those secret, unknown things. When she saw the tip of the iceberg, it was already destined that they could no longer be separated, unless she died. Annulling the engagement before marriage, she should not think about it in the future. Jingwan calmly continued to eat. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure